That dock, she said, her voice a low growl that vibrated with a sense of self-importance so profound it seemed to have its own gravitational pull, is an unpermitted eyesore and a flagrant violation of Article 7, Section 4, subsection B of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions of the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association. It comes down today, Sergeant Miller, or I will have it torn down and bill your account for every last cent of the demolition, plus a 25% administrative fee. Her name was Karen, and she stood on my lawn like a conquering general, a clipboard clutched to her ample chest as if it were a scepter, and the ridiculous, oversized sun hat on her head a crown. Her floral muumuu billowed in the gentle breeze coming off the water, a riot of clashing pinks and oranges that assaulted the peaceful morning. I looked from her furious, puffy face, past the perfectly manicured grass she was currently crushing under her orthopedic sandals, to the dock in question. It was a simple, sturdy structure of pressure-treated pine and galvanized steel hardware, extending a modest 30 feet into the calm, blue water of the lake. My son and I had spent the better part of a month building it, a project to reconnect after my last tour. Every board was level, every screw was countersunk, and it was anchored to concrete footings that I'd poured myself, well above the high water mark. It was perfect. It was also, as she had just so elegantly pointed out, the target of her wrath. I could feel the slow, familiar burn starting in my gut, the one I'd learned to control in the deserts of Iraq and the mountains of Afghanistan, the anger that came from dealing with irrational people who held a sliver of power and thought it made them kings. Or in this case, queens. If you've ever had a run-in with an HOA president who thinks they have the authority of a five-star general, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. And while you're at it, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from, or share your own HOA nightmare. Trust me, you are not alone in this fight, and you are absolutely not going to believe how this one ends. So let's get back to it. Karen was still staring at me, her chin jutted out, expecting me to snap to attention and salute. I gave her a slow, deliberate blink instead. Karen, I began, my voice even and calm, a stark contrast to her barely contained hysteria. I have the county permits for that dock right inside, signed and stamped. The inspector himself said it was one of the best-built private docks he'd seen all year. Her face, already flushed, deepened to a shade of plum. A small, triumphant smile played on her lips. That's the thing about HOAs, Sergeant, she said, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. County permits mean nothing here. We are the authority inside Lakeside Meadows. Your little piece of paper from a county bureaucrat is irrelevant. This is a private community with its own rules. Rules you agreed to when you bought your house. She tapped her clipboard with a perfectly manicured nail. And I am here to enforce them. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of that statement hung in the air between us. It was a declaration of war, plain and simple. She had drawn a line not in the sand, but right across my property, and in her mind, she was on the winning side. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend in her little bubble of petty tyranny, was that I was a man who had spent 25 years in the Army Corps of Engineers. I didn't just build things. I understood the ground they were built on, the rules that governed them from the bedrock up, not just the flimsy, self-serving bylaws of a suburban homeowners association. She thought this was about a dock. She was about to find out it was about the entire lake. My wife, Sarah, had fallen in love with this property first. We'd been looking for a place to finally put down roots after a career of moving every few years. She saw the listing online, a 5-acre plot with a modest house overlooking a small private lake, part of a new development called Lakeside Meadows. This is it, Jack, she'd said, her eyes shining as she looked out over the water on our first visit. This is where we grow old. We bought it from a man named Old Man Hemlock, a farmer in his late 80s, who was finally selling off the last parcels of his family's century-old farm. The developer had bought most of it, carving out the quarter-acre lots for the main subdivision, but Hemlock had held back the 5-acre parcel with the old farmhouse and the lake itself. He was a man of few words, with hands like gnarled oak roots and eyes that had seen more seasons than I could count. When we sat at his kitchen table to sign the preliminary papers, he'd looked me square in the eye. "You take care of my lake, son," he'd said, his voice raspy. My granddaddy dug that lake with a mule team and a scraper. It's not just water, it's memory. I promised him I would. Sarah passed away from a sudden illness just 6 months after we closed. The grief was a physical weight, a constant pressure in my chest. For weeks, the house felt empty. The beautiful view, a painful reminder of the future we were supposed to have. My son, Mark, who was in college, came home for the summer, and it was his idea to build the dock. "Dad," he said, finding me staring blankly at the water, "we need a project. Let's build that dock you and Mom talked about." So we did. We drew up the plans, filed for the permits with the county, and spent our days measuring, cutting, and building. We sweated under the summer sun, our hands grew calloused, and slowly, board by board, the dock took shape. And with it, something inside me started to heal. The dock wasn't just wood and steel. It was a memorial to my wife and a bridge back to my son. It was therapy. It was peace. And now this woman, this Karen, was standing on my lawn, telling me she was going to tear it down. The calm I had maintained began to fray at the edges. My training, my discipline, was the only thing holding me in check. I took a slow breath, the scent of fresh-cut grass and lake water filling my lungs. "Karen," I said again, my voice dangerously quiet, "you are not touching my dock. You are not sending anyone onto my property. And I suggest you get off my lawn before you find yourself in a legal situation you are not prepared for." For a moment she looked taken aback, the sheer certainty in my voice giving her pause. But her ego, a massive and fragile thing, quickly reasserted itself. She laughed, a short barking sound. "A legal situation? Don't threaten me, Sergeant. I have the HOA's legal counsel on retainer. You have a dock. The rules say you can't have a dock. It's that simple. You have 48 hours. Then the bulldozers arrive." She turned on her heel, her muumuu swirling around her like a battle standard, and marched back toward her golf cart, which was parked illegally on the strip of grass between the sidewalk and the street. As she drove away, I stood there, watching until the whining electric motor faded. The war had begun, and I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I was going to finish it. The first official salvo arrived 3 days later, delivered by certified mail. It was a thick envelope with the Lakeside Meadows HOA logo, embossed in a gaudy gold script. Inside was a formal violation notice, printed on heavy cream-colored cardstock that felt ridiculously pompous. The letter, signed by Karen as president of the board of directors, detailed my transgression in excruciatingly bureaucratic language. It cited the exact article, section, and subsection she had quoted on my lawn, and it formally levied a fine of $100 for the unauthorized structural addition. It went on to state that a further fine of $50 per day would be assessed until the violation was cured, which was their euphemism for me tearing down the physical embodiment of my grief and healing. At the bottom, in bold, underlined text, was a sentence that made my blood run cold with fury. "Failure to cure the violation and pay all associated fines within 30 days will result in the board taking all necessary actions, including but not limited to forced removal of the structure at the homeowner's expense and the placement of a lien against the property." They were threatening to take my home, the home Sarah had chosen, the home where I was supposed to live out my days, all because of a dock that bothered no one and which I had every legal right to build, at least according to the laws of the county and the state. But Karen was right about one thing. The HOA was its own little kingdom, and she was its tyrannical queen. I spread the documents out on my dining room table, the HOA violation letter, my county-stamped building permit, the architectural drawings for the dock, and the closing papers for the house. I was a man who believed in rules and regulations, but they had to be just and they had to be legal. What Karen was doing felt like neither. My first move was to request a formal hearing with the HOA board, as was my right under the bylaws. I sent a polite, professionally worded letter, again by certified mail, stating my intent to appeal the violation and formally presenting copies of my county permits. I wanted to give them a chance to be reasonable. I wanted to believe that this was all just a misunderstanding, a case of an overzealous president who would be reined in by a more level-headed board. That belief was my first tactical error. The hearing was a farce. It was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room with beige walls and uncomfortable folding chairs. The board consisted of Karen, who sat in the center of a long table like a judge at a show trial, and two of her obvious cronies. One was a thin, nervous man named Gerald, who fidgeted with his pen and refused to make eye contact. The other was a woman named Barb, whose expression of smug superiority mirrored Karen's perfectly. I presented my case calmly and logically. I laid out my documents. I explained that I had followed every procedure required by the county, the legal governing body for construction permits. I even spoke about what the dock meant to me and my son, hoping to appeal to some shred of human decency. Karen let me finish, a condescending smile fixed on her face. Then she leaned into her microphone. "Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Miller," she said, deliberately dropping my military rank. "It's all very touching. However, as I explained to you before, your county permits are irrelevant. The HOA covenants supersede them. You signed a contract when you bought your home, a contract that says you will abide by our rules. Our rules state that no docks, piers, or other structures may be erected into the lake without prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. And did you submit your plans to the committee for approval?" Barb chimed in, her voice sharp. "No, I did not," I admitted, "because my property survey and deed suggested my authority extended to the water, and therefore county jurisdiction applied." Karen let out a short, sharp laugh. "Suggested? Mr. Miller, we don't operate on suggestions. We operate on the rules as they are written. The Architectural Review Committee, which I chair, would have denied your request anyway. Docks spoil the uniform, natural aesthetic of the lake that all our residents enjoy." It was a lie, and we both knew it. There was no uniform natural aesthetic. A few other houses on the far side of the lake, holdovers from before the HOA was formed, had small, aging docks. Her issue wasn't with aesthetics, it was with control. The board, she informed me, had voted just before the hearing. My appeal was denied. The fines stood. The 48-hour clock for removal was, in her words, back on. I walked out of that clubhouse into the setting sun, the anger in my chest now a cold, hard knot. They had given me no quarter. They had offered no compromise. They had declared war, and they had made it personal. Fine. If they wanted a war of paperwork and rules, I would give them one. They just didn't realize that I was a master of a different set of rules. Rules that were written in deeds, plats, and laws, not on the flimsy pages of an HOA handbook. My next stop wasn't going to be a hardware store to buy a sledgehammer. It was going to be the county records office. The battle for the dock was over. The war for the lake was about to begin. The county records office was a place I knew well. In the Corps of Engineers, we lived and died by surveys, plat maps, and property records. Before you could build a bridge, an airfield, or even a simple forward operating base, you had to know exactly who owned the ground beneath your feet and what their rights were. The principles were the same, whether you were in a war zone or a quiet suburban county. The office smelled of old paper, dust, and that faint, acidic scent of aging microfilm. It was a smell I found comforting, the scent of facts, of history written down and recorded. I started with the master plat for the Lakeside Meadows subdivision. A clerk helped me pull the huge, rolled-up drawing, and I spread it across a massive, brightly lit table. The drawing showed the entire development, every lot, every road, every common area, all laid out with precise black and white clarity. I found my lot easily, Lot 1, a large 5-acre rectangle on the western edge of the development. The lots for the rest of the subdivision were clustered on the eastern and southern sides of the lake. Tiny squares and rectangles compared to mine. The lake itself was the centerpiece of the map. With a magnifying glass, I traced the property lines. The lines for the regular subdivision lots stopped neatly at a designated common area buffer zone that ringed most of the lake. But when I traced the line for my property, Lot 1, something was different. The line didn't stop at the water's edge. It went into the water. In fact, the boundary lines for my 5-acre parcel encompassed the entire lake. According to this master plat, the foundational document for the entire development, the lake wasn't a common area at all. It was part of my property. A thrill went through me, the feeling of a sniper acquiring a target. This was it. This was the key. But I needed more. A plat map was a powerful piece of evidence, but the deed was the final word. I went back to the clerk and requested the chain of title for my property, Lot 1, and also the original deed of dedication for the Lakeside Meadows HOA. This was the document where the developer, upon creating the subdivision, formally handed over control of the common areas to the newly formed Homeowners Association. I spent the next 3 hours poring over decades of legal documents, my highlighter marking key phrases. The language was dense, a thicket of legalese, but the meaning was unmistakable. The deed for my property, going all the way back to Old Man Hemlock's family, described the parcel by metes and bounds, and those descriptions clearly included the entirety of the body of water known as Hemlock's Pond, which was later renamed Lakeside Meadows Lake. Then I found the kill shot. In the HOA's deed of dedication, the developer had listed all the common areas being turned over to the association: the clubhouse, the tennis courts, the green spaces, the private roads. But there was a specific clause of exclusion. It read, "Said common areas shall not include Lot 1 as described in the master plat, nor the body of water and its underlying land, commonly known as Hemlock's Pond, which is wholly contained within the boundaries of said Lot 1. I read it again, and again. The words practically glowed on the page. The developer had intentionally and legally separated my property, including the lake, from the HOA's control. Karen had no authority. The HOA had no jurisdiction. Her entire case was built on a foundation of sand, on an assumption of power she had never actually possessed. The lake wasn't a community asset for the HOA to manage. It was my private property. My dock wasn't an unauthorized structure in a common area. It was a structure on my own land. I felt a grim, cold satisfaction settle over me. Karen had picked a fight with the wrong soldier. She had brought a rule book to a gunfight, and I had just found a tank. I carefully made certified copies of everything: the master plat, my current deed, the original deed for Hemlock's Farm, and the HOA's deed of dedication. I paid the clerk, my hands steady as I signed the receipt. As I walked out of the records office into the bright afternoon sun, the heavy folder of documents felt like a weapon in my hand. Karen wanted to play by the rules? Fine, I was about to beat her with the ones that actually mattered. But I wasn't going to show my hand just yet. Oh no, a good soldier never reveals his full strength until the decisive moment. I was going to let her escalate. I was going to let her walk deeper and deeper into the trap she had set for me. And when she was in the middle of it, so far in that she couldn't get out, I was going to spring it. The fines kept coming. Every few days, another cream-colored envelope would appear in my mailbox, each one a little stab of attempted intimidation. The original $100 fine had now been joined by a cascade of $50 daily penalties. The total on the most recent letter was approaching $1,000. They were absurd, of course, completely unenforceable given what I now knew, but they were still a constant, nagging reminder of Karen's campaign against me. I filed each one meticulously in a new expanding folder labeled HOA harassment. I knew this wasn't just about me and my dock anymore. If Karen was willing to go to these lengths against me, a retired officer with a solid understanding of his rights, what had she been doing to other residents who might be less willing or able to fight back? I decided it was time to do some reconnaissance within the neighborhood itself. I started with my immediate neighbors. To my right lived the Patels, a young couple with 2 small children. I found Mr. Patel out mowing his lawn on a Saturday morning and struck up a conversation. At first he was hesitant, his eyes darting around as if Karen might pop out from behind a bush. But when I explained my situation with the dock, a floodgate opened. "Her? Don't get me started," he said, shutting off his mower. "Last spring we got a fine for improper lawn maintenance because our grass was 3.5 inches high in one spot. The rule says 3 inches max. 3.5. She must have come out with a ruler." He told me they'd also been cited because their children's plastic slide was the wrong shade of green and wasn't in harmony with the neighborhood's approved color palette. They'd paid the fines, not wanting to cause trouble. My other neighbor was an elderly widow named Martha, a sweet woman who had lived in her house since the development was first built. I brought her a plate of cookies and sat with her on her porch. Her story was even more infuriating. Karen had forced her to rip out a beautiful rose garden her late husband had planted because some of the rose varieties weren't on the HOA's approved plant list. She said they were non-conforming flora, Martha told me, her voice trembling slightly. She stood right there and watched the landscapers dig them up. It broke my heart. The stories were all the same, a pattern of petty tyranny and abuse of power. Fines for leaving trash cans out an hour past the designated time. Demands for people to power wash their driveways. A young military family on a tight budget was forced to repaint their entire house because the color had faded slightly and was no longer a perfect match for the original approved paint chip. It was clear that Karen wasn't just an overzealous president. She was a bully who derived pleasure from controlling every aspect of her neighbors' lives. Emboldened, I drafted a simple, anonymous-looking flyer. It read, "Are you a resident of Lakeside Meadows? Are you concerned about the recent increase in fines and strict enforcement by our HOA? A group of concerned homeowners is meeting to discuss our rights and options. All are welcome." I included a date, time, and the address of a small, rentable meeting room at the public library a few miles away. I didn't put my name on it. I printed 200 copies, and in the dead of night, my son Mark and I walked the entire neighborhood, placing a flyer in every mailbox. The night of the meeting, I was nervous. What if no one came? What if Karen found out and showed up with her cronies? I got there early and set up a pot of coffee and some chairs. 15 minutes before the start time, the room was empty. My heart sank. Then the door opened. Mr. Patel walked in, looking determined. A minute later, Martha arrived, escorted by her son. Then 2 more people came, then 5, then 10. By the time the meeting was supposed to start, the room was packed. There were nearly 40 people there, a cross-section of the entire community, all of them looking angry, frustrated, and a little bit scared. I stood at the front of the room. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "I'm Jack Miller, and I live over on the west side of the lake. I called this meeting because I believe our HOA has overstepped its authority, and I have a feeling I'm not the only one." For the next hour, the stories poured out. It was even worse than I had imagined. People had been fined for holiday decorations, for having the wrong kind of mailbox, for parking a work truck in their own driveway for 10 minutes while unloading tools. One man, a contractor named Bill, told us Karen had tried to fine him for the color of the shingles on his roof, even though they were the exact same shingles the developer had installed. We discovered that Karen and her 2 board cronies, Gerald and Barb, held all the power. They constituted a permanent majority on the 5-person board, as the other 2 seats were held by homeowners who had long since given up and never attended meetings. All decisions, all fines, all architectural reviews were funneled through Karen. By the end of the meeting, the fear in the room had been replaced by a palpable sense of anger and unity. "What can we do?" Mr. Patel asked, speaking for everyone. "She controls the board. She controls the management company. She's untouchable." "No, she's not," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs. "No one is. We just have to fight smarter. We need to organize. We need to document everything. And we need to use her own rules against her." That night, we formed the Lakeside Meadows Concerned Homeowners Committee. We elected a steering group, with me as the chair. We exchanged phone numbers and email addresses. We created a shared online folder where everyone could upload copies of their violation notices, photos, and any correspondence with Karen. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a surge of hope. Karen thought she was fighting one man. She was about to find out she was fighting a unified army of her own making. The tide was beginning to turn. While the homeowner committee began its work of gathering evidence, I focused on my own strategic objective. The documents from the county records office were my ace in the hole, but a good commander always confirms his intelligence before launching a major offensive. I needed a legal expert to verify my findings and help me chart the path forward. Through a veterans network, I got a recommendation for a lawyer named Ben Carter. The bio I read was impressive. Former JAG officer, now a partner at a respected firm in the city, specializing in real estate and contract law. When I called his office, his assistant put me right through. "Jack Miller?" Ben's voice was sharp and energetic. "It's a pleasure. I was told to expect your call. Colonel Anderson from the 7th Engineer Brigade sends his regards. Said you were one of the best dam planners he ever had. We spent a few minutes catching up, the easy camaraderie of fellow veterans instantly bridging the gap between strangers. Then I got down to business. I explained the situation, the HOA, Karen, the dock, the fines, and my trip to the records office. Sounds like you've run into a classic tin pot dictator, Jack, Ben said with a dry chuckle. I see this stuff all the time. Let me see what you've got. Can you overnight me the copies of those documents? I sent the package that afternoon. 2 days later, Ben called back. There was a new tone in his voice, a mix of excitement and professional glee. Jack, my friend, this is better than Christmas, he said. I've had my whole team go over these documents. We've cross-referenced them with the state's property laws and every relevant precedent. And I can tell you with 100% legal certainty, you don't just own the dock, you own the entire lake. The land under it, the water in it, and a 10-foot easement around the entire shoreline. The Lakeside Meadows HOA has absolutely, unequivocally, zero jurisdiction over any of it. The relief that washed over me was immense. It was one thing for me, a layman, to read the documents and come to a conclusion. It was another thing entirely to have it confirmed by a high-powered attorney. So what's our next move? I asked. Do we send them a cease and desist? A lawsuit? We could, Ben replied, and I could almost hear him leaning back in his chair. And we will, but not yet. You said this Karen character is escalating, that she's threatening forced removal? That's right, I said. The fines are now over $2,000. I received a new letter yesterday. It's a final notice of intent to remedy violation. It states that if the dock is not removed in 7 days, the HOA will contract for its removal and place a lien on my property for the cost, plus all accumulated fines and legal fees. Ben let out a low whistle. She's putting a lien on your house? For a dock that's on your own private lake? Oh, this is beautiful, Jack. This is a gift. A gift? Ben, she's threatening to cloud the title on my home. Let her, Ben said, his voice laced with predatory calm. Jack, what we have here is a chance to not just win, but to utterly and completely dismantle her. Right now, it's your word against hers in the court of neighborhood opinion. If we send a letter, she'll just lawyer up and it will become a protracted battle. But if we let her take the next step, if we let her actually hire a crew and show up to tear down your dock, she will be committing a felony. Criminal trespass, attempted destruction of private property over a certain value. We're talking about charges that carry jail time, and she'll be doing it in front of witnesses. We'll have her dead to rights, not just in civil court, but in criminal court. We let her build her own gallows and then we hand her the rope. The strategy was audacious, risky, and utterly ruthless. It appealed to the military strategist in me. It was a classic envelopment maneuver. Lure the enemy into overextending their lines, then cut them off and destroy them. And the lien? I asked. It's fraudulent, Ben explained. The moment she files it, she and the HOA are liable for slander of title, which carries its own hefty penalties. We'll get it expunged and we'll sue them for damages. Jack, this woman is about to walk into a perfectly laid legal minefield. Our job is to just stand back and let her take that first step. So we waited. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Every day I looked at the dock, my dock, and imagined a crew of strangers with crowbars and saws tearing it apart. The 7 days on the notice ticked by. On the 8th day, another envelope arrived. This one was from a local demolition company. It was a formal notice that they had been contracted by the Lakeside Meadows HOA to perform a structure removal at my address on a specific date, just 5 days away. The notice included a copy of their insurance certificate and a work order signed by Karen. She had done it. She had taken the bait. I immediately scanned the document and emailed it to Ben. His reply was swift and simple. The trap is set. Let the show begin. I spent the next 4 days preparing. This wasn't just going to be a legal victory. It was going to be a public execution of Karen's reign of terror. It was time for the entire neighborhood to see the Empress with no clothes. The morning of the planned demolition dawned bright and clear, a perfect day for a reckoning. I was up before sunrise, a pot of strong coffee brewing as I went over my checklist one last time. Everything was in place. The members of the concerned homeowners committee had been alerted. I'd told them to gather at the public access point at the end of the street at 8:45 a.m. to act as silent witnesses. I had also made two other important calls. The first was to the non-emergency line of the county sheriff's department. I spoke to a dispatcher, calmly explaining that I was the owner of a large parcel of private property and that I had reason to believe a group of individuals, under the mistaken belief that they had authority, were planning to enter my property to destroy a structure. I gave them my address and the time of the expected incident. I wasn't asking them to intervene preemptively, merely to be aware of a potential trespassing and criminal damage situation. The dispatcher was professional and took down all the information, promising to have a patrol car in the area. My second call was to the city desk of the local television news station. I spoke to an investigative reporter named Susan Chang, whose work I admired. I told her there was a developing story in Lakeside Meadows involving a homeowners association, a disabled veteran, and a significant property rights dispute that was about to come to a head. I gave her the address and the time, telling her I couldn't promise anything, but if she showed up with a camera at 9 a.m., she might get a very compelling story. The hook was too good for her to resist. She promised she'd be there. At 8:30, a large, grimy flatbed truck from D-Day Demolition, an ironic name, I thought, rumbled down my street and parked in front of my house. Two men in dirty overalls got out and began unloading equipment: crowbars, heavy-duty saws, chains, and a portable generator. They looked about as thrilled to be there as anyone would be on a Tuesday morning. A few minutes later, Karen's golf cart whizzed into view. She parked it once again on the grass and strode onto my property as if she owned it. She was wearing a bright yellow pantsuit today, making her look like an angry, oversized canary. Barb and Gerald, her board cronies, were with her, looking like nervous, poorly dressed Secret Service agents. Karen immediately began directing the demolition crew, pointing at my dock with an imperious finger. "That's the structure. I want it gone, all of it, down to the footings, and I want it done quickly." The foreman, a big man with a weathered face, looked from Karen to my house, a flicker of unease in his eyes. "Ma'am, are you sure you got all the permits for this? We're not insured for unpermitted work on private property." "I am the president of the Homeowners Association," Karen snapped, her voice echoing in the quiet morning air. "My authority is the only permit you need. Now get to work." Just then, two things happened simultaneously. A news van with the Channel 8 logo on the side pulled up and parked across the street. Susan Chang and a cameraman got out, the camera already hoisted onto his shoulder. At the same time, from the end of the street, the silent procession of my neighbors began. 40 strong, they walked quietly and stood on the public sidewalk opposite my house, their arms crossed, their faces grim. A sea of silent judgment. Karen saw the news van and her expression shifted from anger to delight. She thought the media was here to document her triumph, her decisive action to enforce the rules. She puffed out her chest, ready for her close-up. The demolition foreman, however, now looked extremely nervous. A news camera and a crowd of angry-looking neighbors were not part of the job description. "Ma'am, I think I need to call my boss," he said, pulling out his phone. "You will do no such thing," Karen shrieked, her face turning crimson. "You will do the job you were hired to do. I will not be undermined." It was time. I opened my front door and stepped out onto the porch. In my hand, I held a handsome, leather-bound folio. I walked calmly down my lawn, stopping about 10 feet from Karen and her entourage. The news camera swung toward me. The crowd of neighbors fell completely silent. The world seemed to hold its breath. "Good morning, Karen," I said, my voice perfectly level. The foreman and his worker stopped what they were doing and looked at me. Karen spun around, her eyes blazing with fury. "Miller, I gave you a final warning. You are too late. Your illegal dock is coming down, and it's all going on your bill." "Actually, Karen," I said, a thin, cold smile on my face, "it's you who is too late. And before your men commit a felony and your company gets sued into bankruptcy, I suggest you all look at a few documents." I opened the folio. The show was about to begin. I held the folio open, my hand steady. The first document on top was the large color-coded master plat of the Lakeside Meadows subdivision. I had mounted it on foam board, and the lines were clear and undeniable even from a few feet away. "This, Karen," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the morning air, is the master plat filed with the county, the foundational document for this entire neighborhood. As you can see, the lots for most of the subdivision are here. I traced the smaller parcels on the east side with my finger, and their property lines stop well short of the lake at this buffer zone designated as HOA common area. I then moved my finger over to my side of the map. But this is my property, Lot 1. And as you can plainly see, the property line for Lot 1 does not stop at the water's edge. It encompasses the entire lake, the whole thing. A confused murmur went through the crowd of neighbors. Karen squinted at the map, her expression a mixture of disbelief and contempt. That's ridiculous. That's a misprint. The lake is a community amenity. It's not a misprint, I said, flipping to the next document. It was a certified copy of the HOA's own deed of dedication. I had highlighted the relevant section in bright yellow. This is the document where the developer legally created the HOA and granted it authority over the common areas. I'll read the most important part aloud for you and for the news camera. I cleared my throat. Said common areas shall not include Lot 1 as described in the master plat, nor the body of water and its underlying land, commonly known as Hemlock's Pond, which is wholly contained within the boundaries of said Lot 1. I looked up and pinned her with my gaze. The developer, Karen, the very person who created your HOA, specifically and legally excluded this lake from your control. It was never a common area. It has never been under your jurisdiction. It's private property. It's my private property. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the grass. The demolition foreman's eyes went wide. He immediately motioned for his partner, and they began quickly and quietly packing their tools back onto the truck. They wanted no part of this. Karen's face had gone from red to a pale, pasty white. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Barb and Gerald looked at each other in panic. And finally, I said, my voice like ice, this is a copy of my deed, the one you should have consulted before starting this entire illegal campaign of harassment. I held it up. It confirms my ownership of the entire parcel, including the lake bed, which means, Karen, that right now, you, your friends, and these gentlemen you hired are all trespassing on my private property. I paused, letting the weight of the word trespassing sink in, and by ordering them to destroy my dock, a legally permitted structure valued at over $10,000, you were about to commit felony criminal damage to property. Right on cue, a county sheriff's patrol car pulled up behind the news van. A tall, serious-looking deputy got out, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. He'd clearly been briefed, and his eyes swept the scene, taking in the crowd, the news camera, the demolition truck, and our little standoff. He walked toward us, his expression unreadable. "Is there a problem here, folks?" he asked, his voice calm but authoritative. Karen finally found her voice. It was a high-pitched, desperate squeak. "Yes, officer. Thank you for coming. This man," she pointed a trembling finger at me, "is refusing to comply with the HOA rules. He built an illegal structure, and we're here to remove it." The deputy looked at me. I simply held out the open folio. "Deputy," I said respectfully, "this is a property dispute. This woman, the HOA president, is under the mistaken impression that her association has jurisdiction over my private lake. These documents from the county records office prove that it is, in fact, my property, and she and her crew are trespassing." The deputy took the folio and spent a long moment examining the plat map and the highlighted legal documents. He was a professional. He knew what he was looking at. He looked from the papers to Karen, then to the demolition crew, who were now practically hiding behind their truck. He handed the folio back to me. He then turned to Karen. His voice was flat, with no room for argument. "Ma'am, based on these documents, you are on private property without the owner's permission. That is trespassing. I am ordering you and your associates to leave the premises immediately." Karen stared at him, her world visibly crumbling. But the rules, the covenants." "Ma'am," the deputy said, his patience wearing thin, "your HOA rules do not give you the right to trespass on private property. Leave. Now. Or I will be forced to place you under arrest." The word arrest finally broke through her wall of entitlement. Her face crumpled. The queen had been deposed publicly and humiliatingly in front of her subjects in the evening news. Barb and Gerald practically sprinted for the golf cart. Karen, after one last hateful glare at me, turned and waddled after them, her yellow pantsuit now looking like a costume of defeat. The demolition foreman approached me, his hat in his hands. "Mister, I am so sorry. We had no idea. We're out of here." "You're fine," I told him. "You were just doing your job. She's the one who's liable." He nodded gratefully and got into his truck. A moment later, both the demolition truck and Karen's golf cart were gone. Susan Chang, the reporter, walked up to me, her microphone extended. "Mr. Miller," she said, her eyes alight with the thrill of a great story, "can you tell us what just happened here?" I looked into the camera, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of profound peace. "Justice," I said simply. "Justice just happened." The news story aired that night on the 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock broadcasts. Susan Chang had done a masterful job. The report opened with a shot of Karen, red-faced and screeching, pointing at my dock. It then cut to me, calmly presenting the documents, and the deputy sheriff ordering her off my property. They had footage of the dejected demolition crew packing up and Karen's humiliating retreat in her golf cart. They even included short interviews with Martha and Mr. Patel, who spoke emotionally about the harassment they had endured under her reign. The story was framed as a classic David versus Goliath tale, a quiet veteran standing up to an abusive, power-mad HOA president. My phone started ringing before the 6 o'clock segment was even over. The first call was from Ben Carter, my lawyer. He was practically shouting with glee. "Jack, you were magnificent. It was perfect. We couldn't have staged it better. She's finished." The second call was from the chairman of the National Veterans Organization I belong to, offering his full support. Then the calls and emails started pouring in from my neighbors. The fear was gone, replaced by a surge of righteous anger and empowerment. The story went viral overnight. It was picked up by national news outlets and aggregator websites. The video of Karen's downfall was shared thousands of times on social media, usually with captions like "HOA, Karen gets wrecked," or "Don't mess with a veterans dock." The Lakeside Meadows HOA became, for a brief time, the most infamous homeowners association in the country. The fallout for Karen was swift and brutal. The HOA's management company, fearing legal exposure and damage to their reputation, immediately sought to distance themselves. The HOA's insurance carrier, upon being notified by Ben Carter of the impending lawsuit for harassment, slander of title, and attempted criminal damages, sent a sternly worded letter to the board indicating that they would likely not cover damages resulting from willful and malicious acts undertaken by the board president. This meant Karen could be held personally, financially liable for her actions. The pressure was immense. Within 48 hours of the news story airing, a petition to hold an emergency meeting to recall the entire board of directors was circulated by the concerned homeowners committee. It got signatures from over 80% of the households in the neighborhood in a single day. The meeting was scheduled for the following week in the high school auditorium to accommodate the expected crowd. It was standing room only. Nearly every homeowner in Lakeside Meadows was there. The atmosphere was electric. I sat in the front row with Ben Carter, Martha, Mr. Patel, and the other members of our steering committee. Karen, Barb, and Gerald sat at a table on the stage, looking pale and grim. They were no longer a panel of judges, they were the accused. The meeting was run by a neutral third-party parliamentarian, as required by the bylaws for a recall vote. One by one, homeowners stood up and, for the first time without fear, aired their grievances. They spoke of the unfair fines, the public shaming, the constant anxiety of living under Karen's rule. They brought their documents, their photos, their stories of financial hardship and emotional distress caused by her petty crusade. It was a powerful, cathartic outpouring of a community that had been silenced for too long. Then it was my turn. I didn't speak with anger. I simply walked the entire room through the facts. I presented the plat maps and the deeds on a large projector screen. I explained in simple, clear terms how Karen's entire authority over the lake was a fantasy she had constructed. I then detailed the fraudulent lien she had intended to file and the criminal charges she had narrowly avoided. When I finished, a motion was made from the floor to recall Karen, Barb, and Gerald from the board of directors. The vote was taken by paper ballot. While the ballots were being counted, Karen was given a chance to speak in her own defense. She stood up, her hands trembling, and tried to justify her actions. She rambled about protecting property values, about maintaining standards, about how she was only trying to do what was best for the community. But the words were hollow. Her power was broken. She wasn't a leader. She was just an angry, bitter woman who had been caught. The results of the vote were announced. The motion to recall all 3 board members passed with 95% of the vote. A thunderous applause and cheers erupted in the auditorium. Karen stood for a moment in stunned silence, then grabbed her purse and fled the stage, not even bothering to look back. Barb and Gerald scurried out behind her. A new board was elected on the spot, composed of respected community members, including Mr. Patel. They asked me to serve as a non-voting advisor on property rights and covenant reviews, a role I gladly accepted. The war was over. We had won. In the weeks that followed, a sense of peace and normalcy returned to Lakeside Meadows. The first act of the new board was to declare a full amnesty, rescinding and refunding every fine that had been levied by Karen's regime over the past 2 years. The HOA's lawyer, under pressure from the new board and the insurance company, quickly negotiated a settlement for the lawsuit Ben Carter had filed on my behalf and for the class action suit that other homeowners had joined. The settlement covered all our legal fees and included a formal apology from the HOA. The cloud over my title was, of course, never filed. The management company that had enabled Karen for so long was fired, and a new, more responsive company was hired. The thick book of ridiculous architectural rules was pared down to a few common-sense guidelines. The neighborhood started to breathe again. People started planting the flowers they wanted. Children's play sets, in all shades of green and blue and red, reappeared in backyards. Neighbors started talking to each other again, not in whispered complaints, but in friendly greetings over the fence. The community that Karen had tried to control through fear was now rebuilding itself on a foundation of mutual respect. As for Karen, her humiliation was complete. Ostracized by the neighbors she had once terrorized, facing potential personal lawsuits, and stripped of the only power she had ever known, her position in the community became untenable. A for sale sign appeared on her lawn about a month after the recall meeting. I heard she sold the house at a loss to a cash buyer, desperate to get out. I never saw her again. One warm summer evening, about a year after that fateful morning on my lawn, I was sitting on my dock. The wood had weathered to a soft, silvery gray, and it felt solid and permanent beneath my feet. My son Mark was home from college and we were fishing, our lines cast out into the calm, glassy water of the lake. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple. A canoe glided by, paddled by the Patels and their 2 small children, who waved happily. On the far shore, I could see Martha tending to her new rose garden, a riot of vibrant color that was defiantly, beautifully nonconforming. I thought about old man Hemlock and the promise I had made to him. You take care of my lake, son. I had. By fighting for my own rights, I had inadvertently liberated the entire community. The lake, my lake, had become what it was always meant to be. Not a source of conflict, but a place of peace. It was a private lake, yes, but it was now enjoyed by a community that respected its boundaries and appreciated its beauty, all because its owner believed in justice, not tyranny. Mark reeled in his line and cast it out again. You know, Dad, he said, looking out at the water, Mom would have loved this. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, but this time it wasn't just grief, it was gratitude. I looked at the dock, the house, the lake, and the peaceful neighborhood beyond. Yeah, son, I said, my voice thick with emotion. She would have. The last rays of sun disappeared below the horizon, leaving the water dark and still. A sense of profound, hard-won peace settled over me. The battle was long over, the victory secure, and the future of this place, our home, was finally bright.